right, so we are now live for Parlez with Sensei Shui, episode 11, discussing bias. So before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and move into it for everyone to listen for the repeat. So basically, we got to start out with defining what is bias. So bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually considered unfair. And so let's then define prejudice, because you often see prejudice used in a racial context, but not really used in the word of itself. Because a lot of people think to seem prejudice and racism are the same thing, but they're two completely different aspects. Not going to talk about racism today. I'll touch on it, but I'm not going to go deep into it. But prejudice is a preconceived opinion not based on reason or actual experience. So, with that being said, we're going to discuss these biases because it is very important just to bring awareness to these, because these are things that we do every single day. We do on a consistent basis. No one is free from bias. That includes me. But with that, let's be aware of some of these biases. So if you listen to this and your head gets hurt, it's like, wait, everything's biased. Well, technically, yes, it is. Technically, everything is biased. Coming from a point of no bias, especially when you list these 24 different biases I will go through, you could find a way for something to fit. So with that being said, we're going to start with the first bias of anchoring. So anchoring bias, what that is, the first thing you judge influences your judgment of all that follows. Human minds are associative in nature, so the order in which we receive information helps determine the course of our judgment and perceptions. Be especially mindful of this bias during negotiations. So for this, the perfect example of an anchoring bias is when, say, you're going for employment or a job or a gig, depending on whatever it is, and someone says, hey, so how much do you charge for your services? And you're just like, $60, right? They say that, all right, you've already said what you're worth. You've anchored yourself. So not going to be 60. Like, all right, well, I'll pay you 200 right back, because that's what I was planning to do. No, because since you've anchored that, that starts as a bias of, okay, this is the bias that's in place. So now that's the anchor. So maybe I might go up or I might go down from there because they just told me what the highest is. As well as the first thing you judge influences your judgment of all that follows. For, say, like on TV, or rather say the news, but what is the difference? When you see something that's like, oh, a hurricane's coming, a hurricane's about to hit, the anchoring bias anchors to that. Oh, now we're in this state. Oh, I need to buy up all this water. I need to buy all this water. I need to buy all this water. That is a sign of anchoring bias, because we are judging the first thing, and then that influences everything else afterwards from there. The second type of bias we'll speak about today is confirmation bias. You favor the things that confirm your existing beliefs. We are all primed to see and agree with ideas that fit our preconceptions and to ignore and dismiss information that conflicts with them. So, confirmation bias is one of the most popular biases that you see used all the time in marketing. So, for example, Facebook uses this, everything uses this, but especially confirmation bias can be very dangerous, because this will keep us from learning new information. In turn, this new information that we want to learn instead is replaced with things that we already agree with. For example, if you think that you're healthy, despite the fact that a doctor might say, hey, you have some high blood pressure, you might want to watch the amount of processed foods you eat. He's like, no. My uncle lived to 90 years old and he ate McDonald's every single day. All right. That also touches in with the, I'll touch on it later. The bias just slipped my mind. But that's really important to do, because when we understand what our preconceptions are and where they lie, That way we can know, hey, wait, I might just be agreeing with this person because they look like me. So this is something I see, honestly, I see this being done somewhat in the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements as well. When we're talking about confirmation bias, just because someone looks like you or they're in your in group, that's another one, in group bias, does that mean that the information that they present is valid? That is a good thing to be conscious of. The third bias we'll speak about is the backfire effect. When your core beliefs are challenged, it could cause you to believe them even more strongly. We can experience being wrong about some ideas as an attack upon ourselves or our tribal identity. This can lead to motivated reasoning, which causes us to double down despite disconfirming evidence. So the backfire effect. One of these examples, which most people see, it could be like, oh, people will start to raise awareness of what's happening in the nation. Like, hey, you know what? Coronavirus exists. People get sick. And then it's like, no, it doesn't. Like, my uncle didn't get sick. Like, he went out to the store. Or, hey, you see someone, police violence. Oh, wait, I've never seen that happen. It doesn't work. And that confirms the bias, right? Because these start to stack up on each other. What is that? You favor a belief that confirms what's already going on, and then it backfires because, oh, someone is telling me something that's challenging my core beliefs that everyone's good and wants this. So I'm going to believe this even more despite the evidence that's right in front of me. This is something to be very conscious of because the thing about biases is that all humans experience this. And with this, we need to be aware of how we're perceiving if we truly want to start to awaken and have knowledge of what's going on. The fourth is declinism. You remember the past better than it was, and you expect the future to be worse than it will likely be. Despite living in the most peaceful and prosperous time in history, many people believe that things are getting worse, using metrics such as life expectancy, levels of crime and violence, and prosperity statistics to show how things are getting better. So, how does this play out? So, you remember the past is better to be, aka a lot of the MAGA movement, things like that. I'm not saying bad, but it's like, okay, you want to conceive that things, just because things were great for your group economically, that also related to everyone else going on. That was something that was really interesting is when I was growing up and people would be like, oh yeah, I would definitely go back to the 50s and the 60s. Like the fashion was so good. And I'm like, you realize there was like the height of the civil rights movement, people were getting fire hosed and all this other crazy shit going on. Were people realizing that, or are they just like looking at the Beatles in like a concert and then, oh wow, this is really great? And then when you get into what's going on now, the power of media and our perception, depending on what we look at and how it influences how we receive reality. Based on that, if we're just seeing violence all the time on TV, we won't really know about all the good stuff going on unless we go out to really look for it, or we start to actually reflect on, hey, you know what? You can go outside and get your food at a store and come back. You know, like 200 years ago or 100 years ago, that was not as much the case everywhere. I would even say 50 years ago. Please, someone correct me if I'm wrong. But say even 50 years ago, grocery stores did exist, but they weren't at the extent that everything is now, where you could actually go somewhere and get food and not have to grow it yourself or harvest it or anything like that. The next hypothesis we'll go with, the next bias we'll speak about is a just world hypothesis. Your preference for a just world makes you presume that it exists. Basically, a world in which people don't always get what they deserve is an uncomfortable one that threatens our preferred narrative. Try to remember that we're all fallible and bad things happen to everyone. Because this is something too, I see often that, oh, why do bad things happen to good people? Good people shouldn't experience these things. But to me, it's this weird thing where we all experience suffering. It is samsara. All right. So going against this just world hypothesis, why do bad things happen to good people? Bad things happen to everyone. Rather, it is the good people who feel like they don't deserve to experience suffering. That's something that I've seen that's always made me like, what do you mean? Or sometimes something I used to say And I need to still reflect on this as bad things happen to everyone, but as the bad people who almost see it as like, oh yeah, this just happens. It's not like, oh well, the good things happen. They have all this money and da da da. Well, that's also when it comes to what confirmation bias, like we were speaking earlier, favoring things that confirm our existing beliefs. This is one of the, I would say, I won't even say dangerous, but this is something to be very conscious of because the algorithms on these social media platforms show us information of which we will agree with, even if the information is not as correct or as accurate as it should be. This is something that we need to be conscious of. And with that, it's a little tricky to get into because that just means hearing something we might not want to hear, even though it may be true. All right. So now the next bias we'll go into is the sunk cost fallacy. You irrationally cling to some things that have already cost you something. When we've invested our time, money, or emotion into something, it hurts to let it go. Ask yourself, had I not already invested something, would I still do it now? So this is something I'll tell a brief story when it comes to some close friends of mine. Some friends I had, you could say, going back in high school, great people, really good times. But despite, oh, I would lend something and they lost it or they broke it, nothing was said. Despite going over there and falling behind on my projects, despite, oh, speak about the things that I'm doing or going into manifest, and then it's like, oh, no, bro, you don't need to be doing that. I just play video games. It was a thing to be like, oh man, but he's such a good person. He helped me out through this time. Yes, even like saying good person, what doesn't mean he's a bad person, but I would rather say a supportive friend. Oh yeah, because this happened 10 years ago, that means that so and so and so, or they were really here for me at this time, or even say money things. Oh yeah, that's such a good idea. He helped me out at that. She helped me out with this, despite the fact that, hey, you know what? We're not moving in the same direction, or you know what? They've actually hurt me a lot more than it's helped me. So I need to be conscious of this, kind of separate, detach myself from the situation, and then say, okay, if none of these things happen, what is happening now? Where I forgot the artist of the song, but what have you done for me lately? Duh, 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 duh. That song. But that's kind of a true thing for us to be conscious of moving forward, irrationally clinging to things that have already cost us something. This is something, all these biases are presented in a logical, secular way. But of course, knowing me, I like to bring things into a spiritual matter. So, how often do we cling to habits or even clothes, people, situations, jobs, sometimes out of comfort, even though we know it's not the best thing? Or like some things that's very similar, like eating. Like if we say, hey, you know what? I don't want to eat dairy anymore because it makes me nauseous and it really hurts my stomach. But the times that we have considered, like, oh, yeah, like this is something I'm around family, so I could do this. It's all good. Like it'll be fine. And then, in the bed, like, oh, like, why did I do that? But then how many times will we repeat this cycle, repeat the cycle? Will we repeat the cycle and repeat the cycle until we decide to get off the merry-go-round? This goes into something I feel like I get slapped with a lot is the Dunning-Kruger effect. This bias says the more you know, the less confident you're likely to be. Because experts know just how much they don't know, they tend to underestimate their ability. But it's easy to be overconfident when you have only a simple idea of how things are. So for this, I see this a lot with experts, or I see this when it comes into you watching the news, you're watching something and someone says, oh, Dr. So and so. Oh, because this person's a doctor, they have a good judge on health and reality and all this and all these things more than me. Yes, they may know more, but with that, still check about what someone's saying. That's even something where this comes into play, say, even right now. Some people may presume because of the shirt I'm wearing, the things behind me, that I cover my head and I like to wear a turban because it's comfortable, that, oh, this guy's super spiritual. He knows all this other stuff going on. That may be the case, but rather you need to be the judge in what is it that is being presented. And it falls onto the one of us that's listening. Are we going to actually fact check and look this stuff up? Or are we just going to kind of nod our heads like bobbleheads and go about like, oh, yeah. They said it because he knows what he's talking about. Oh, this person's very happy. Yeah, they're super rich. So they know. Yeah, they know. However, do we actually check to see if these things are true? The next bias is the bar none effect. A lot of the time I thought it says bar none because they say it like that, but bar none effect. You see the personal specifics and vague statements by filling in the gaps. So the bar none effect, this one is very popular within astrology, and they blame psychics for it too. And others use this bias to make it seem like they're telling you something relevant. Consider how things might be interpreted to apply to anyone, not just you. So this is something when it comes to astrology you could look at. So one thing to do would be like if you have the ability to click on other things horoscopes and like really read all 12. Read all 12 from a separate point of view and stepping back to be like, all right, is this kind of very like when you read into it, it's like, oh, you just experienced this and all these great things are happening and da da da. With this, is this a bias that we're applying to be like, oh yeah, all these things are true because like, yeah, this is definitely my sign. And I see this, I see this. And that comes into a bias that I'll add in, I call the manifestation bias, right? When you start to believe in something you're reading, it will truly manifest to be true because humans and you are indeed that powerful. So be conscious of what you read and what you place your belief in because that will in turn manifest. So if you attach yourself to this astrologer or what they're writing, you kind of almost giving your power away into like what someone's writing about what's going to happen in your future based on where the stars are at. So be conscious of these things. I'm not doubting any of this, but just being conscious of your own power and sometimes what happens and some things what I have seen happen in my personal life. When you want to believe something to be true, most of the times in time it may become true, or if not that, you will see it to become true going into a bias that we were speaking on earlier, that is confirmation bias. Favorite things that confirm our existing beliefs. So some things too is things I've been saying that might have irritated people, or you heard something, you got off and you got on, or even whatever it is. Oh wait, he was talking about astrology, I love that stuff. I don't agree with that. Boot. Confirmation bias right there. So sunk cost bias. Thank you for your support. So a sunk cost bias is irrationally clinging to things that have already cost us something. When we've invested our time, money, or emotions into something, it hurts to let it go. Ask yourself, had I not already invested something, would I still do so now? So this is the time they call it sunk cost because a lot of times it comes into like money and investments, but I see this in other parts of life because why they use it as sunk cost, it's like, oh, well, I invested $10,000 into the stock and I made 30,000. So I know it's going to happen again. Or like, oh, you went to a blackjack table and you actually made some money. And then it's like, oh, well, this one's hot. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay here and keep going. Because yeah, the sunk cost gets us really thinking with when we want to make decisions and choices in our life. Do we keep doing this because we actually want to, or is it there's something in the past that we're holding on to that no longer applies to our future? We just need to, or even our present, and need to be conscious enough to be like, you know what, I am not this person anymore. I don't do this anymore. My value systems are different. Oh, these people have changed dramatically. I've seen how they're acting. I've seen how they're treating me, or they voice more things about how I stand with them. This doesn't align with me, so I need to do something else. This is how I see sunk costs applying to things. And so I'll go into the next one is the framing effect. All right. Framing effect, allowing ourselves to be unduly influenced by context and delivery. Only when we have the intellectual humility to accept the fact that we could be manipulated can we hope to limit how much we are. Try to be mindful of how things are being put to you. So for all these things, I like to talk about the bias and let you reflect, because with framing, this is something that happens to everyone. What's even think about when we're looking at a screen, we're looking at a frame technically. And when we're speaking from the frame of our perspective, from our point of view. So with that, I feel like this is something that happens to everyone. This is something that happens and that we all do because we're talking about the context and the delivery. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. Oh yeah, that makes sense. But be conscious of when it's more about the context and you're seeing it in the results and things don't match up or the application. That's where you want to check it. That's when it says to be intellectual about, okay, how is this going and where's this moving and what is it that this is bringing me towards? Are the promises or are these claims that this individual or this product or this situation or this event actually manifesting, or am I experiencing this, or at the first sign of my doubt am I just thrown more and more and more? For example, like I got scammed, not kind of, I got scammed like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I guess that's why I said 3 or 4 weeks ago. And what this person did is each time I wanted to back out and be like, you know what? Like, I don't think it's right. I was like, well, you need to do this, and well, do this. Well, then do this, do this. I was just kind of getting thrown in a loop, thrown in a loop, thrown in a loop, just in loops and loops, kind of like not getting to know or center myself enough until it was too late. And I'm like, all right, I see what's going on. Like, I already knew this was too good to be true, but like for real, like, cool, you got me, good job. But that's just a way of existence for some people. Moving into the next one of in-group bias. So in-group bias is you unfairly favor those who belong to your group. You presume that we're all fair and impartial, but the truth is we automatically favor those who are most like us, our belonging, or into our groups. Try to compensate by imagining strangers to be family. So when it comes like this, the in-group biases, a lot of these, when you become aware of them, you see them, but this is something that we need to be conscious of, that, just because someone else does yoga too, well, in our mind, we'll trust them more. Or what I see a lot is like, just because someone has a similar shade of skin as someone, this automatically makes someone more trustworthy. These are things I see that's like, wait, and this is something I like to say, that the color of someone's skin is not a judge of character. You have to really connect with their heart and then make your trial call there. Or just because someone is in the same fraternity, sorority, club, yoga studio, restaurant, employee with you does not have anything to do with the validity of themselves as a human being. Their actions do. So this is something for us to be conscious of, to truly look at someone's actions and reflect on our interactions, the actions in between each other, in order to develop a stance or a viewpoint of it that's not completely right. I was laughing because this next one is fundamental attribution error. You judge others on your character, but yourself on the situation. It's not only linked to view other situations with charity, it's more objective too. Be mindful to also err on the side of taking personal responsibility rather than just justifying and blaming. So judging others on their character, but ourselves on the situation, instead of both on the situation or both on character. It's like, well, right. It would be like, what happened to me with the scam? It would be me being like, oh, well, that other person is, he seemed like a pretty nice guy. But for me, I was just like going everywhere, and like it was just because I was running all over the time, and I was just thought it was something I was supposed to do. I thought I was supposed to invest, not look and be like, you know what? I was susceptible. I wasn't listening to my gut, and I just should have been realistic and listened to the words I was saying, but I did not. So that's what caused that to happen. So with all these things, to be conscious of not letting a situation get too much, but also for us to take personal responsibility in what happens in our lives. Oftentimes we would like to look at the situation or circumstance, but we need to dig down deeper and realize, based on the outcomes, it is us that has the power to redirect and change and alter the outcomes. Because everything, it's an interaction. Like I said earlier, it's not an action, it's an interaction. There's two parties going involved. Yes, one person has it, but the other person, the party, who could be you, also had a play into how things turned out. When we get too situational with things, it could also have us doubt our own character sometimes, in a way of not almost seeing the goodness of ourselves. So that's something we need to be conscious of, is not get so lost in a situation that we lose ourselves in our character or forget how magnificent we truly are. Moving into this next one, the placebo effect. So this this is a bias that I feel some type of way about, but the placebo effect, if you believe that you're taking medicine, it can sometimes work even if it's fake. The placebo effect can work for stuff that our mind influences, such as pain, but not so much for things like viruses or broken bones. Keep a healthy body in a bank balance by using evidence-based medicine from a qualified doctor. If you're curious what I'm reading from, it's from School of Thought biases poster. So it has a list of these. So I'm going through and just reading it verbatim, what comes off. The placebo effect, how I feel. So, okay, what biases am I about to exhibit right now? It's about to be framing. It's about to be confirmation bias, depending on who you're listening to. Could even be anchoring. All right. So the placebo effect is something I like to call the manifestation effect. All right. You call placebo effect because some things you don't want to. The placebo effect, how I honestly feel about it, is because it's done in sometimes with medicine. And it's a big thing where it's like, wait, if someone's getting a sugar pill, aka believing that something they eat will work in comparison to a pill that costs, $700 a month, and you wanted to say, oh yeah, like this pill actually did something, or is it truly the belief despite this medicine being in the person's body? I'm not a doctor. I'll say I'm not a doctor, but sometimes the placebo effect is used, or that word is said to discredit the power that we have over reality as human beings, the power we have to heal ourselves, the body is self-healing, the power we have to really change our future in our reality. I feel like, oh yeah, that's just placebo effect. Oh, that's just placebo effect. I mean, like you actually believed it happened and then it altered reality for it to actually happen. I call that the manifestation effect. I call it the belief effect. Because if something like that is truly happening and you're able to get better because you believe you'll get better, or an outcome has changed because you knew, hey, if I have hope and I do this, then it actually changes. Don't just throw it off as a placebo effect. You are a divinely powerful being. I call this the manifestation effect. The next thing, the halo effect. How much you like someone or how attractive they are influences your other judgments of them. If you notice you're giving consistently high or low marks across the board, it's worth considering that your judgment may be suffering from the halo effect. So the halo effect, a lot of times this is used. I see this in business. I see this is everywhere, but especially I see it in business. I see it in ads. You see it on TV. It's if you notice when it comes to like the characters, they'll often have the protagonist as someone that's very attractive, and the antagonist is someone that has some type of flaws on there. So this effect is given in where like, oh, this person's so good. Da, 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 da. So of course I'm gonna look past their flaws. They're fine. They're fine. It's just like Batman. Like the people were like, "Oh yeah, Batman, super cool because he's saved crime." Da, da, da. And then the Joker. Oh, I don't like the Joker because he blows up hospitals and he does all this other stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Despite, okay, what is the Joker's motivations for this and why does he act out in this way, right? Or even for it, how much we like someone and how attractive our influences our other judgments of them. I've seen this with myself in the past when it comes to the halo effect. Oh, because someone is attractive or there's some type of like sexual appeal, I have looked past other judgments in their character, how they treated me, what they've said, what they've done, just because, oh yeah, like they're pretty or they're so hot. Oh, be conscious of these things, that these are very real things and biases that apply to all human beings. No one is free from this. The more that we can be conscious of this, the more power it gives us, the more able we are to truly be aware of how this brain, the mechanism, interprets data into our spirit. Because that's another thing to be very conscious of. Why am I going through all these biases? Why am I talking about all these things? Because the bias, you could say, is like the manual or some like limitations of the computer that processes the data that goes back to your spirit. We need to be conscious of this, of how, hey, information that comes in, the way it's interpreted, there's like a filter that goes through, which is the brain, which interprets this. Just like what I talk about is if you ever like look at a wall or you look at just some scribbly lines, you'll start to see two eyes, a nose, and a face. Why? Because the brain is literally trained to do that de facto, even if there's nothing there. It's going to look and shape and create that. Just be aware. Just like for this next thing, the bystander effect. You presume someone else is going to do something in an emergency situation. If you've ever taken psychology, they talk about this a lot. Just like you could even say right now, right? With all the protests going on, just because we're assuming that we see people out in the streets, does that mean other people are going to go out into the streets? Or because there's an emergency or something happening that other people are going to step out of their way and help? Because sometimes I'll even get with this global situation and everything, being on the in group, seeing like, oh, well, the only way to help is if you're out here and shouting. Not like, oh, if I actually reflect, talking about straight up United States right now, if you understand that your local governments and legislation actually has a lot more to do with it than the executive branch of government does not enforce law. The legislative branch does. So look into your Congress, look into your local elections, look into your mayors and stuff like that. That stuff is really important. They actually make the laws of the country, not the president. All right. So if you really want to make change, look into that, contact your legislators, enforce it on them. Just say you won't vote for them and really get a crowd of people. Like, say you get those crowds of people, instead of shouting, get them to like agree and change legislation and tell, hey, you know what, we're not going to reelect you if we want you to be in. And these are people who have been in office for like 20, 30, 40 years. Like, check it out. Like, don't just believe what I say. Legitimately go and check it out for yourself. And then we're going to go into the next bias, the availability heuristic. That our judgments are influenced by what springs most easily to mind. Right? For all this, you could say this entire thing for me has been availability heuristic, because why I just kind of go off the cuff, speak through my heart. I'm not reading off of the script. I'm reading these definitions off of a page just so that I can be accurate. However, availability heuristic, how recently, emotionally powerful, or unusual your memories are can make them seem more relevant. This in turn could cause you to apply them too readily. Try to gain different perspectives and source statistical information. So when it comes to this, how do I see this playing out in my life? Right? You could say, especially say, if we don't want to eat something, or if we say, oh, you know what, I really don't like tomatoes. Is it because you don't like tomatoes, or is it because we had this one memory of like, it was like my mom and eggplant. All right, I'll talk about that. My mom and eggplant, because eggplant tastes great if you cook it right. If you don't cook it right, super sketchy. This is my personal opinion. But basically, it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I took her to an Indian restaurant and they overdid the eggplant. It was super mushy. And then from there, she was completely convinced that all eggplant was disgusting. Until I like snuck it in some food. I made it really well. And she's like, yo, what is this? I'm like, hey, it's eggplant. It's like, no way. Like, eggplant's disgusting. Like, because that memory was so big in mind that influenced that. Or I see this in play when, say, someone is afraid of dogs or something like that. How does this come into play? Because, oh, something happened when they were like 6, 7 years old where a dog chased them and they hopped over a fence. It became a traumatic experience. And they're afraid of dogs to this day because that's their connection to it. All right. So how often do we have these really strong memories that affect the way that we judge reality? How often do we have these really strong emotions connected to a single circumstance that we play to be true for everything else? And with that, going into belief bias, which if a conclusion supports your existing beliefs, you'll rationalize anything that supports it. So put both of those together. If our judgments are influenced by what springs most easily to mind, and if the conclusion supports our existing beliefs, then we then rationalize anything that supports it. So that way, peace, John. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask. So when it comes into these, we need to be conscious of how availability heuristic and belief bias occur. Because if our judgments are influenced easily by most what comes to mind, and then if the conclusions support those beliefs, we then rationalize things that aren't true. So it'd be like shortcuts and different things like that. If we're going to take a shortcut and we sped and we like was really sketchy to get dangerous, which I have done, I will say, with this, then we're like, oh yeah, you know what? Like I have to speed because I got there in time and it worked and blah, blah, blah. Why? Because it was really easy to look at the time that we got to work in time. We just happened to make the lights and we didn't hit anyone and everything was maybe close calls. But despite that, not really looking into, hey, you know what, this might have not been the wisest way to do something. I actually did endanger a lot of people and myself. There's no need to be in a rush, just plan accordingly, right? But we need to be conscious if conclusion supports our existing beliefs. Because if it's like, oh, yeah, well, I lost a lot of weight when I didn't eat for 2 weeks, despite then it was like, oh, yeah, well, that's the way for me to lose weight is to starve myself. Because somehow connecting to the existing beliefs that say in that situation, right? In that situation, in that perspective, that, oh, when I do this, it's justified. It's almost like the means justify the ends. Despite kind of, hey, let me actually look at my beliefs and see if this actually makes sense, or am I just doing things for a result? And the last one I'll leave everyone off with is groupthink. You let the social dynamics of a group situation override the best outcomes. Dissent can be uncomfortable and dangerous to one's social standing. And so often, the most confident or the first voice will determine group decisions. So, with this, it goes into change the chant. How are people screaming no justice, no peace, and thinking that's what they're going to receive? You need to be conscious of what you're saying. Oh, wow. Okay. So, I'm going to answer this. My dad is abusing. What should I do? Okay, for this, I would say try to reach out. I am not qualified to handle this situation, but the advice, don't apologize for being yourself either. But for this, I would say contact and look into resources like Google what to do and how to move, because that's for yourself. The one thing I want you to realize is he is abusing you because of where he stands with himself. You did not do anything wrong. You do not do anything wrong. You are just fine. Despite you may be blaming yourself or he says he's blaming you, what is happening is your father is putting out his own insecurities, his own anger, and placing that on you, which is not right. And I'm sorry that you experienced that. That is very unfortunate. But one thing for you, okay, that's really intense. Okay. So for y'all, I would say, are you able to get out of the situation? Because if y'all won't be able to survive, that sounds very intense. Um, yeah, in a way. For this, what I'll do, for this, I'm not an expert on any of this. What I would do is really look into it. Okay, so financially, it's hard. I work a little bit. Okay. So for this, what I would do, honestly, look into how to make money online in different sources. Like if you're on TikTok, because most of y'all on YouTube found me on TikTok, look into hashtag making money online. And then for that, there's a lot of ways where if you really want to get yourself out of these situations, marketing is getting huge. A lot of these things I was just talking about apply to marketing. So getting your Google ad certificate, getting like Facebook ad certified, things like that, right? So that way, then you're kind of qualified to be like your own online or digital marketer. And from that, you could start to charge for your services on things like Fiverr or Upwork, stuff like that, and just kind of set your price and like really kind of hustle your way out of it, out of the situation. So with that, that's the best advice I can give you. But when it comes to getting out of the situation, I would say really see if your brother and you could really talk together and create a game plan for how to get out, how to work together. And some things when we're in these uncomfortable situations is not accepting them of what's really happening. It's because sometimes it's like, what is greater? Is it the comfort of being in an uncomfortable situation or the discomfort of moving and not really knowing what's going to happen. All right. It's more like, okay, well, we know that regardless of, say, even financially when it gets to the spot or as it's getting there, to trust in yourself and your plan that you and your brother make, or your mother too, or if it's in a situation where you and your brother are really like the ones holding, y'all are the glue to be able to move forward and go from there if y'all are even of age to do that. I'm not sure how old your brother is or anything like that, but that is one thing that I do. And then also look into resources for abused women, stuff like that. Yeah, he's 12. So for that, what I'd say is like, for that, I would say support him when it comes to emotionally support. But in a way, when it comes for your brother, I would say, hmm, the thing to do in that situation is to make sure that he's emotionally intact. Financially, I would say look into how, say, you and your girlfriend could really try to hustle the way out of the situation. And when I'm saying the biggest, what I will say again is like trying to make a game plan. Look on the internet for resources. I appreciate you trusting me enough to come out and like ask these questions. But I will say again, I'm not like a qualified abuse counselor or things like that. But there are resources for families of those who are. Some of the systems are a little weird, but when it comes for at least job help, things like that, I could say if you're what is it called? It's like workforce solutions. If you look into workforce solutions, that's basically the unemployment solutions, and they have jobs and things like that. That is something you can do. Um, so yeah. So that's kind of the general advice I have for those of y'all who are listening to the replay. Yeah. All right, Miguel, if you could this stuff will be repeated. So for this, if you want to more of a problem with me being scared. So are you scared of the uncertainty? That is my question to you. Because it seems like that's what I'm saying. This is something that I learned, I would say, a year or two ago. They talk about the fear of loss needs to be greater than the fear of change. So for this, are you more afraid of the loss of finances than the changing of the situation that will be uncomfortable, but is what is the greater discomfort of being in a situation where it is highly abusive or going into a situation where you're really going to have to hustle to make ends meet for a while, but then at the end it will be a more beautiful and better spot, but that will have to come with effort. And when I say a plan, I stress plan, plan, plan. I would say then you and your girlfriend try to make a plan how to get y'all out of the situation. So that way, when emotions and doubt starts to seep in, so that way be like, no, let me look at this. I would say listen and start to plug yourself with positive things. Listen to my stuff. Listen to Gary V. Listen to Tony Robbins. Like listening to these people on a consistent basis will have that positive self-talk and how to get you out, especially Tony Robbins. That dude, he came from a situation very much like yours. And so his perspective and you'll see where he's at now. It's like Tony and then Robbins with two B's. Like Robin, like the character, like Batman sidekick, like the bird, but two B's. Tony Robbins. Like look him up. Listen to that. Listen to that stuff like it's the radio. What I would say, replace your inputs of the music and the radio and all that other stuff with these motivational speakers, inspirational speakers. Because that what we'll do will start to shift your mindset into learning how to jump, learning how to set a plan, having the confidence within yourself to make a change. Because that's really what needs to happen. It's like the fear is when I say the fear of uncertainty. Sometimes it is, I guess this does relate to the bias. Sometimes it's the fear of uncertainty that keeps us in these biases, despite the fact that the situation we may be in is not logical for us to stay in. However, we stay in it because of comfort, the fear of the unknown. But sometimes what we need to do is at least track down the next 5, 7, 12 steps and then start to move forward with the people that you can confide and trust in. So that is my advice to you. I would say truly, man, look up Tony Robbins. Look him up. He's from a very, very similar situation. He's maybe in his 40s or 50s now, doing very, very well. I'm grateful for your questions, but please do this. Like, to get out of this situation, you're going to need to focus and really do it. You know, that's the thing. Like, it's Gray's here, and I'm grateful for your gratitude and your support, but you're going to really need to like kind of go in a battle mode, for lack of a better term, and be focused to get yourself out of this situation. Listen to Tony Robbins, listen to Gary Vee, listen to some of my older videos, right? In there will be stuff that will resonate with you that will help you navigate through the situation. For my stuff, with the exception of this one was a little spiritual. Some of the other ones are a lot more like this internal voyage, right? Their stuff is a lot, it has taste of it in it, but I would say Gary Vee is a lot more mindset and hustle mindset. Tony Robbins is about getting yourself out of a situation despite the circumstances. He had a very abusive mother that, if I remember correctly, would pour down bleach down his throat and tell him that he wasn't shit and that he wouldn't be anything. And now he's a multi-billionaire from doing motivational speaking and helping people get out of certain situations like that. And he's an author and a bunch of other stuff. It's not that money is an indication of success or how he made it out, but if you're talking about finances, he found a way to turn that situation around, tell his story, and communicate how he told his story to get to where he's at now. And for you, check him out. I would feel like you would really connect and resonate with him too. And he's a really like no nonsense, like in your face type of guy. He has tons of videos on YouTube. Check him out. And I would say replace your Netflix time with Tony Robbins, Gary Vee, Sensei Shui time. Like, be conscious of the inputs that you put into your mind and how that translates into how you experience your reality and how you interact with it. So with that, for those on the repeat, yeah, this is quite the conversation. Still going into the guided meditation after this. Miguel, I wish you peace. If you have questions, if you're on TikTok or Instagram, just look into different things, find things. But I would say, especially brother, like look up Tony Robbins, look up Gary Vee, look at my older stuff. And then especially Gary Vee and Tony Robbins have been doing this stuff for like 10, 20 years. So they got more content than you could think. I've been doing this for about a year. Hey, bro, one thing I will say, please do not apologize about being yourself. All right. Yes, ask a question about meditation. You did not mess up my video. If anything, you showed and you brought light into some of these things I was speaking of earlier about how this applies in our lives and how we need to change. And it is sometimes these traumas that trigger our spiritual awakenings because it has us start to look for connection elsewhere. So with that, yeah, go ahead, Oreo Big Man, ask your meditation question. I feel like it will resonate and it will connect. But Miguel, one thing, and this is a habit you have built up that you will need to take work and to change, but do not apologize for being yourself or having your stance. Just, this is it. If you really did do something, like if you stepped on someone's foot and you didn't mean to, say, I apologize. You are not sorry. Like, you are not a sorry human being. You are magnificent. You are powerful. You are determined. All right. Know this in yourself. All right. And embody that. You might need to write that down and say it to yourself every single day. Like, literally write that down in your handwriting. Say it every day. Or if you're really big on writing, write each one 21 times every single day. First thing you do when you wake up before you look at your phone, I got notebooks by my bed. I wake up, I do dream journaling and sometimes conscious dream, but I also keep my goals right in front of me. So that's one of the first things. What's the best way to get in a meditation state? So a little trick for this is walking. I know that sounds super weird, but like straight up, leave your phone at home, leave the gadgets at home, go for a walk for like 10 to 15 minutes. And when I say go for a walk, No headphones, like listening to the environment, listening to everything else around you. Go for a walk to 10 to 15 minutes. And then once you find your place or you found yourself called, sit down, go into your meditation. If you need more time walking, do that. But I find it works best truly like going for a walk and then going and then sitting down immediately. But the best way how to do it consistently is to meditate consistently. Understand you have your on days and your off days. No one's perfect. If the people who are online and they make it seem like they're perfect all the time, I'm not apologizing. They're bullshitting you. They are selling you. Because what is reality like? Is it 75 degrees every single day of the week? No. It fluctuates. Nature fluctuates. Things change. There's seasons, just like there's seasons that we experience internally, as within, so without. So if you're like, okay, what's the best way? Being consistent, yet mixing it up a little bit. So I would say, meditating, like have your kind of time in your spot. You do your, 10 to 15 minutes a day, getting it in. If that's too much, do it 3 times a week, but do it 3 times a week. Don't bullshit yourself. Like be dedicated to it and then build up from there. If things get repetitive, just ask me other ways to mix it up. Personally, to talk about what do I do, I'm going through one of those little seasons where meditation is a little harder for me to get into the States. So what I do it at night, or I mix in qigong and yoga before, and then I go into meditation. So like my body and my mind is already kind of processed through stuff, and then I slip into that mode because it's easier to like kind of have all the babble, talky, chitty chatty, like getting the body a little physically exhausted and moving, and then going into your meditation helps a lot. And then you combine that with focusing on your breathing and your body. I believe I have episode, it's like episode 8 or 9 about detachment. Check that one out because that one, the technique I teach at the end, that's talking about feeling your body going from your feet and going up. It's a really nice way to drop in, but it takes time. Like the results you get is conducive of the amount that you put within. So when I mean taking time, like literally getting in a position, feeling your toes, feeling them erase, feeling your feet, feeling the bones in the feet, feeling the marrow in the feet, feeling the blood vessels in the feet, feeling the ankles, each little bone in the ankles, like taking your sweet time. Or if you want to go a little faster, I like to go by it and do like a flex release. Like I pretend like I'm flexing my feet, release. I flex my shins, release, my calves, release, my knees, release, and make my way up and up. But the one thing too is I find is especially when you get to the face, like take your time to relax your face. Like keep your eyes closed. If you do this right, you may like actually drool a little bit. So what I do is sometimes I'll put something in my lap, or if I have like something like this, like if I have a towel, like I'll legitimately like do something like this if I'm gonna be going into okay, I'm gonna detach myself and like really relax my body because you find yourself once you become more aware and when I say you truly know, a lot of people say it, but they don't, I feel like believe it. We convince ourselves that we believe it when we really don't. That's like, oh yeah, I know I'm not the body. Okay, you could rattle it off, but do you really know when you're waking up, this is like a tentacle and you like wake up and you're moving your hand and it's electricity that's moving your hand and looking at your hand like it's an extension of yourself, but it's not yourself. To get to some of these feelings or that weird state where your tongue will start to tingle and maybe getting a little nauseous because it's like, oh shit, like you're not supposed to know that like I'm not this. Oh. And they'll bring you back down, or your dog will knock on the door, something will bark, or someone will come into the room when you start to get into these states. But when it comes into relaxing your face, as you relax your face, the face, everything's connected to everything else, but the face, this is where like most of our sensory is at. So when you really start to shut down the face, you'll really find yourself start to slip into easier. Like I'm saying, spending time relaxing the lips, relaxing the jaw, relaxing the cheeks, the eyes, the forehead, the ears. And when you're really getting deep, you'll hear this like really slight pop. Like I don't know how to describe it. It's just like a really, really soft. But that's how you know when they're really relaxed. And you might be drooling a little bit, but then with that, you'll find yourself detaching, really detaching, slowly detaching even more and more when you're in these meditative states. So, long and about, best way to get a meditation state, go for a short walk, 10 to 15 minutes without your phone or any technology. The second you get back, sit down in your meditation pose and go in. All right. So with that, this has been by far the longest episode. So for those of y'all who listen to the repeat, that's why it's about an hour long. Thank you, Miguel and Oreo Big Man, for your commentary and for your support. Yes, and please share with others. So we're going to go from there. This is the conclusion of Parlez with Sensei Shui, episode 11. Meditation is right after this. So have a nice day and namaste.